The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I'm a diversity educator and a core alignment coach. I support agencies and organizations in identifying patterns of bias that are not serving them or others well, and more importantly, teach practices to learn how to cultivate new habits, new attitudes, new actions that align with our values, to be more inclusive for everyone, and that genuinely brings greater, healthier communities about. If you want to check out my samples of retreats and workshops, you can go to my website at knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress.com. I'm super excited about my guests tonight and our show tonight. We have two guests, and I'd love them to come on out while I read their bios. And feel free to interrupt me, but I'm going to read your bios. It's so impressive, all the different things that each of you does. And I'll share it first. The title of the show is Life Through the Minds and Hands of CODAs, which I learned is Children of Deaf Adults. Chynna Arnold and Chynna Arnold, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
And I would just want to acknowledge to our listeners and viewers, I am very sorry we don't have an ASL interpreter for this show. We tried many resources, hasn't happened yet, but they taught me, Kenneth and Chynna taught me, we can retroactively add sign language for people who can view it in the future. So Kenneth is the child of deaf adults and a freelance ASL aide and interpreter and founder of the Davis ASL American Sign Language Club, an organization that provides a free ASL resource twice a month. He also works part-time for the City of Davis at the Adaptive Recreation Program, where he supports adults with intellectual disabilities in recreational activities such as bowling, bocce ball, and day trips. In addition, he volunteers with the Community Mercantile, a locally owned reuse store focused on reducing consumer waste by rehoming donated goods. Kenneth graduated from UC Santa Cruz in 2022 with a BA in art and with a minor emphasis in education. Chynna Arnold, also a child of deaf adults. They are siblings. She's 23 and was born in the ASL interpreting lifestyle, with both her parents being deaf and her mother being deaf and blind. She's both fluent in ASL and Tactile ASL, and she's been interpreting for the deaf and deaf-blind communities in the greater Southern California area professionally since 2020. Her work type includes freelance interpreting, which is a very wide range of interpreting for deaf children at school to deaf inmates in prison. That's quite a range. Also, she works at a call center for video relay interpreting. Chynna graduated from San Diego Mesa Community College with her AA and ASL interpreting at the same time. She was going to SDSU and graduated with her BA in Women's Studies. Chynna has known since she was 3 that she wanted to be an interpreter for the deaf and deaf-blind communities, and that they're both going to share about life as CODAs, talk about deaf culture and deaf marginalization. There's a couple of case studies that are tragic that they might include in this conversation, and deafblind CODA and what that means between hearing and deaf worlds. gosh, you guys, you're so impressive. Is there any other good you could serve in the world? You guys, you guys cover so much territory of like huge heart, extremely helpful services to so many people.
We do our best. That's what we can say is we do our best.
It's so impressive.
Yeah, I think for us, it's just like the normal, I guess. We never look at it as a perspective of we're serving a greater purpose in the world. We're just like, oh, no, that's our lives. We were born into it. And I think growing up, we were like, oh, other people, your parents aren't deaf. Like, this isn't the normal. Okay, like we kind of learned that as we got older.
Mm. And it's really quite honestly rare to encounter other CODAs. It's a very uncommon thing. There's quite a few, I mean, statistically speaking, but practically, like, the only time we really have ever run into other CODAs has been at deaf events, pretty much.
Gosh, not in school growing up, not in colleges. Wow.
No, it wasn't until the job I have now, where I work at Sorensen Video Relay Service, where I've actually, like, my two best friends are CODAs. And, like, me, Kenny, and my two best friends, we all went out to dinner, and we're all talking. And Kenny's like, oh, wow, like a moment of realization, like, you understand how I was raised. Like, you understand, like, oh, your parents did that too. And it wasn't until really working here where I've met a lot of CODAs. And I'm like, wow, I've never had this kind of, like, sense of belonging, if that makes sense, like relating to other people.
Yeah, because a huge thing is, like, as CODAs, we're kind of in between the hearing and the deaf world, sort of as like a bridge, where we have the at-home experience with deaf parents, deaf culture, you know, in the extended friends and family. But then when we go to school or we go to work, we're in the hearing world, which is, you know, we're able to kind of do our thing and get around, but there's always a sort of disconnect, you know, between, and when it gets to a personal level, because people talk about, when they talk about their families, it's a whole thing. It's a very different kind of life.
Can you expound on that more, either you or Chynna, because I think we're so ignorant. We, meaning the hearing world, who grew up with hearing parents, there's so much about the isolation and marginalization of deaf community or children who are hearing who grew up in deaf community that I think we need to recognize. Can you just educate me more about that?
I think what comes to mind, I remember, like, growing up, I don't know if this really answers your question, but I think it does. I remember growing up and having certain friends, like, they weren't allowed to come to my house. Oh, be like, because, like, if there's an emergency, like, the parents' perspective, oh, well, how's your mom going to call 911? And I'm like, oh, well, she has her TTY and she has her video phone. Like, no, we can call 911. Like, you know, and then they're like, oh, well, you're not really as supervised as, you know, we would want you to be. And, like, also just, like, I also remember, like, oh, my friends were able to, like, call their parents, like, on the phone, like, hey, I'm going to, and, like, talk to their parents. Like, especially because our mother's deaf and blind, like, they do have the video relay service where, like, technically you can call the deaf person. It goes through an interpreter and then you call. But for us, because our mom's deaf and blind, we never had direct communication with our mother. So just things like that were kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, no, yeah. I remember exactly the kind of, like, situations you're talking about, Chynna, when we're growing up. Yeah. And the layer of having our mom being deaf and blind adds a whole other aspect, because our parents are divorced when we're pretty young. So there's times where our dad, he wasn't living with us, right? So it would just be our mom, and that's what would create a lot of concern. And while we're not ignorant to the fact that, yeah, if you can't see, you can't hear, you're probably not going to be able to supervise your kids as much as one might be comfortable with. But at the same time, like, our mom was able to do a lot of things that a lot of people assume she just couldn't do. Like you want to try to mention communication, like, we use tactile, as mentioned in Chynna's bio, where you sign into the hand. And this is something a bit more recently developed. But I want to get back to, like, general deaf kind of oppression. We call it autism, right? So when the world is generally geared towards hearing people, right? And when we talk about American culture, ASL became a language in the mid to late 19th century at I think it's called Hartford or something like that, Connecticut School for the Deaf. And the language is developed by Laurent, a French man who came to the United States with a man named Gallaudet. So if you know anything about deaf culture, deaf Americans, you know the name Gallaudet, because he is the only deaf university in this country is named after him. Him and Laurent came here and raised the money with another guy. It's a whole story, but they developed ASL at this school. And so it's a relatively newer language, right? Which it was created in combination with English, or not English, French, and various pidgin signs from across the eastern United States. And pidgin signs, a whole pidgin language, it's a linguistic thing. But throughout the early 20th century, the educational mindset of oralism really took hold, where kids were to be educated, deaf kids would be educated through forcing them to learn to lip read, right? And a lot of the times that is forcing the deaf person to accommodate for the hearing person rather than meeting everyone halfway, right? And so that's where a lot of deaf oppression, right, or autism kind of partly originates from, is the fact that we live in a world that's specifically is not designed, or society, I should say, with deaf people in mind. When we think about, I don't know, Chynna, any really good examples come to your head?
Not at the moment. No.
Not at the moment. Yeah, see, I'm kind of blanking on really solid examples, but you
That's
know,
okay.
like having an interpreter here tonight. There's a great example at our feet, right?
Or
For
like
sure.
closed captions at bars, you know, like, and also it's not even like you have the TV sound on at a bar most of the time. So like, why not have closed captions so you can know what's going on? Just like things like that, like very like things people wouldn't think of. That's what comes to my mind.
Yeah, unless you've been around deaf people, you don't really think about, like, I remember I was watching like a concert on TV with my dad, and because I wanted him to see it, and I wanted him to like kind of like experience some of it. And it is a rap concert, so you know, rap and hip hop lyrics are a huge part of it. And the fact that we were watching this, and I was trying to find the closed captioning, and all the captions were like music. Just said music. They didn't even have, and this is a multi-million-dollar artist. They couldn't even get one person to transcribe already written lyrics and just have it go, you know. And that's just one example. Or, you know, but that, and you know, most people too, when we talk about sign language, people, for us, it's just like that's just our language, you know, like we communicate and sign very comfortably. It's a language, but a lot of people still think of sign language, or American Sign Language specifically, what we're talking about, as a simplified form of English, or just English without speaking, which is not true. It's closer to French than English, right? And I don't speak French, and I know like heck, Chynna does not speak French either, but the grammar structure and the way a lot of the words and meanings come from French, like we mentioned Laurent earlier. He's brilliant, by the way. That guy is a genius, a brilliant linguist and teacher and educator all around. But there's a beauty to the language, yes. But for us, it's just the language, right? You don't really describe, like, someone says, "Oh, I speak Russian, I speak Mandarin," right? Oh, those are such beautiful. Oh man, I've always wanted to learn those languages. I've always wanted to learn. We always get this, right? And I think part of it is like, one, it's like, okay, it gets kind of annoying, honestly, just to be frank about it. Like, yeah, we know it. Yeah, we hear all the time. Everyone always says, "Oh, I've always been meaning to learn American Sign Language." But I think it also goes to speak, on the other hand, how we as humans have a natural inclination to speak nonverbally, communicate nonverbally, because a lot of communication, most of communication is nonverbal. Really, when you think about it, the tone in my voice, the way my eyebrows are moving. Right now, I'm taking on a tone. You can tell, oh, he's being kind of self-aware, you know, something like that. We have a lot of assumptions implicitly, right?
For
about
sure.
how it's not in the words, it's how it's being said. So we already have the inner mechanisms to communicate non-verbally, and people kind of hunger for it. And like, oh, I should know it, you know. And it's not just like, oh, it's a fun thing to do. It's a hard language to learn, but there's a need there because people are like, oh man, I want to talk to deaf people, right? I want to communicate with people. I could really go on about that whole aspect, but
I do want to say that American Sign Language is not universal. That is a common misconception. People are always like, oh, so like you can talk to anybody all around the world. And I'm like, no. There's different languages for sign language. Like I remember like working at the prison, there was a prisoner who used LSM, which is Mexican Sign Language, Spanish Sign Language. And it's completely different. So even though like Kenny's saying like, oh, everyone wants to know it's gesture, like not gestures, that's not sign language, but like
nonverbal.
That's the nonverbal. But like each country or like each spoken language typically will have its own form of sign language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was Venezuela. Recently, very recent, I believe it was in the 1970s, had their own form of sign language, Venezuelan, the English Venezuelan sign language, right? Rise up so early, in fact, that linguists were able to study it as an emerging language, right? And I'm pretty sure, I'm not mistaken, it's Venezuela. But globally, you have Australian Sign Language, you have British Sign Language. I'm sure there's Japanese Sign Language. Even amongst Native Americans and Native people in general, you have various forms of sign language as well. Even dating back to pre-Columbus times, a lot of Native people would communicate with various forms of sign language. And obviously spoken language too, of course, but usually they go, no pun intended, hand in hand with each other. But now we live in a time where ASL and sign languages, at least I can speak for America, ASL is not really offered widespread in schools, where we offer French, Spanish, Mandarin, other languages. But it's funny how the only language that has been organically created in the United States is not taught in the United States. And I think that's
so interesting.
And that's part of the thing where it's like, that's kind of like part of the thing we're meeting halfway, where it's like, why do we need to fully rely on interpreters? I'm trying to kind of biased to the fact because that's our job. We're interpreters. That's our livelihood. So yeah, we're kind of like, we kind of benefit from that need of needing interpreters, right? So I'm just addressing that bias. But that's like, why do we need interpreters? We should have hearing people get their own interpreters, kind of thing, is like sort of the deaf perspective. And it'd be very handy to have a deaf person here, because I feel like they'd be able to speak to those kind of like perspective shifts a lot better than we could.
Well, we can in the future.
We should.
Yeah, some people have been invited. It would be wonderful to add to our understanding and help break isolation.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
That would be great.
Once you agree, Chynna, once you agree, it's a good idea.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I would love to have a deaf person on here.
Yeah.
Well, Chynna, I was going to ask you, like, do you think that, I know this is subjective, but because of the relative isolation and like hardly meeting any other CODAs in your entire lives, unless you're at deaf events, do you think that you guys formed a special, well, you must have a special understanding between each other, and that doesn't mean you can't argue like all siblings or have disagreements, for sure, no doubt, you're human, but do you feel like, was it even, I don't know, I'm just imagining that you guys have a closeness, a bond in a way that no one else could understand.
For sure. I mean, Kenny is my best friend. Like I always say, like we have lived the same experiences. Like we have older brothers, but like half brothers. But me and Kenny were two peas in a pod, even though we fought and we were sometimes horrible to each other. Like me and Kenny have experiences that I don't think anyone could ever really understand, even CODAs, like because of our mom being deaf and blind. Like even like one time we had therapy together, like he joined my therapy session and my therapist was like, you two like have such a unique like relationship, and like not saying like depend on each other, but like you can really like learn from each other, from your experiences. And like even recently I've been like finding a bunch of old photos of me and Kenny from our childhood. I found it on a CD. I bought a CD player to connect to my computer, and just seeing the photos of us, like how close we were. I'm like, Kenny was literally my best friend. I mean, obviously he still is. But yeah, we definitely only us understand necessarily 100% what we went through and our upbringing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I'm curious, like when you were only 3 years old, you knew that you wanted to be a deaf and blind interpreter. Like
Yeah.
that's pretty amazing. Like what was the 3-year-old mind thinking? Like was it just like enthusiasm, like this is so cool, I want to share this, or was it like what was it? What was behind that thinking, you think?
I think it was multiple things. So like, well, as CODAs naturally, I think all CODAs would say you grow up interpreting for your parents, whether it's the grocery store. Like that starts at a young age. Maybe not even like if your friend's like, oh, like what are they saying? You naturally are going to hear like a hearing person talking to your deaf parent, and you're going to want to relay that communication to them. And I think I'm very nosy. I want to be in everybody's business. And even as a little girl, I would always watch my mom's conversations with her friends. She'd be like, stop, like, go away, like, don't look at our conversations. And I'm like, I want to know. And when she would use the video relay, which is what I work for now, so it's like a full circle moment, I remember just like sitting, and it's a camera connected to your TV. An interpreter comes on the screen. So you type, like, for example, like 911. I'm not saying that my mom called 911 in a specific moment and I was watching, but like you type 911, interpreter comes up on the screen, kind of like how they have a headset, and then they call 911 and then they interpret what my mom's saying. And I remember like calling her doctor's appointments, calling whoever she's calling, and just sitting there and like watching and being like, wow, that's so cool. Like I want to do that. Like I want to be an interpreter in general, but also more specifically like work for Sorensen Video Relay Service, which now I do work for them. So it's definitely cool being on the other side. But yeah, I've always known I wanted to be an interpreter. Like 3 out of 4 of us in our family, like out of my brothers, we're all interpreters. But I always say I wanted to be an interpreter first. That was my dream. So
It's true.
They're all copycats.
they
Yeah,
are copycats.
China's always been particularly good at sign language too. Even I think if she learned it we had hearing parents and China just happened to learn it at a young age, I think she would still have that same knack for it nonetheless. And I think the fact that she's a native signer just exemplifies her ability, or bolsters her ability. I've ever since while we were growing up, I always looked at China as like being like the better signer, right? She just had the knack for it. Not to say I was a bad signer or couldn't sign or anything, but I just had I'm a bit more of a, how you say, an abstract thinker, a bit of a eclectic person, a kooky kind of person, strange, especially as a kid. And so my mind was always kind of thinking up in the clouds, always drawing or thinking about this, that, and the third. So ASL is a very kind of, it's very organic, right? So it's a very organic way of speaking and communicating. So for me, it was hard to like get into that like that rhythm, that groove, and be able to recall words at a time, signs at a time. China's just bang, boom, 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 sign in, sign in, sign in. So I remember even at we would call it deaf blind class growing up, but it was really more so like a community meeting, deaf community meeting in Seattle, where we were growing up in Seattle, which also has a huge deaf population, by the way, in Seattle. And in Seattle too, they had was the Deaf Blind Lighthouse, where tactile ASL, as we know it now, was primarily developed. So it was very good that we were there, and our mom was basically in the community of people. There's even a YouTube documentary about Helen Keller. Someone's like, it's basically debunking all the conspiracy theories. And in that video, they're talking about tactile sign language. And there's people that we knew growing up in that documentary. So that was pretty cool. Anyway, cool. China's always been a great signer. So it was only natural.
So when, like, meaning China can express like more subtleties and nuances,
complexity, just also just how like quickly she was able, and still I'm just gassing over my sister right now, but able to communicate. Like for me, I'm as a kid especially, I would speak very, very kind of, it's hard to explain, but I would ask Chynna oftentimes, like, can you express this idea for me in ASL? Like, can you sign this to mom? Can you help me communicate this? I'm really trying to get this, but I can't get it in ASL. But Chynna could, and Chynna would oftentimes help me. Now that we're older, I think we're definitely much closer in terms of our skill. But I'm always going to see Chynna just a little bit, just because she's just got it. She's just got that very natural talent for it. So
That's cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Chynna.
I can't tell which one of you is older if you want to reveal that. You don't have to. I'm just curious. I just wondered, like, was she or like literally older and modeling for you?
No.
Okay.
No, Chynna's younger than me by a year and a half, so it's not that much younger. But that's funny.
Oh yeah, that's
all of our life we've heard that. We don't. Who's older?
And I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I'm like,
Chynna, of course.
Me.
Yeah, even though it's not her, it's me. But like I said, I was a very goofy and aloof child, and it kind of still as an adult. But yeah.
I'm sorry. Can I ask one of my questions from my ignorance?
Do your thing.
Oh. Well, this is it. This is the thing. We're all doing it. I'm just curious how and thank you for letting me ask questions. How did you, like, who did you emulate learning how to speak verbally? They both speak verbally, or like how does that work?
I think that's a great question. I'm like, these are great questions. I would not even come to think of these questions. I always tell people, like, even in college, I would be like, oh, like, if you're going to read my paper, I didn't learn, like, English wasn't my first language. Like, I didn't learn English until about probably like preschool or like kindergarten, maybe like I learned it a little bit as I was little. Our dad is deaf, very vocal. Like, I think half the people wouldn't really know he was deaf because he speaks very well, but he's deaf. Like, he cannot hear. And then, and then our mom, like, I understand my mother. To me, I understand what she's saying, but to a like an average person walking down the road, they'd be like, what is that sound? But like, that's my mom, and I understand her. But I think we just learn from like our surroundings. Maybe I definitely probably learned our brothers. Our oldest brother, I think, is 18 years older than me, and then my other brother's 10 years older than me. So just like being around, like hearing siblings and then going to a hearing school and stuff like that. TV. Yeah. Watching TV. Obviously, like, our dad loved watching TV, and just, like, your surroundings, like, and our parents would talk to us, but in their own way. And also, like Kenny said, like, deaf-blind class, like, we had a lot of exposure to interpreters growing up, and also like doctor's appointments, stuff like that. Like, there's an interpreter there. And then obviously, like, the world is hearing. So like, even though in our little home, like, our little cocoon was deaf, once we walk out the door, it's not. So I don't have a pinpointed moment of, oh, this is when I learned English, but I know that it wasn't our first language, and I learned it as I got older.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I was throwing in my 2 cents while Chynna was talking, but and so on that, for me, I think I kind of gravitated towards like really developing an advanced English acquisition from a young age. So while Chynna's getting this ASL, like, we're both communicating these two languages. Chynna's getting the ASL, like, oh, I'm getting it. I'm going to be the interpreter. For me, I was kind of like, I'm going to explore the hearing world, like on my own time and do my own thing, and so I learned to read and write at an accelerated level in school growing up, and that's just it. Like, it's like Chynna said, just the world around you. It's a hearing world. You're going to hear, if you're hearing, you're going to hear English, so
can you just tell us more about, like, exploring the hearing world? Did it feel like stepping into, I mean, for all of us, I guess, when we step out of our homes, I grew up in a mixed heritage household, so we already had different cultures in the house and different languages and different religions. But in your house, did you feel a difference? Like, did it feel like you're stepping to a different culture when you were in a hearing world?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say, because I think just because we're so young, like,
Yeah, it was just normal that this was that way and that was that way.
Kind of, yeah, pretty much. I think like we knew really early on, like, yeah, there's deaf people, but I think when we got older, fully realizing like how stark, like how, I guess more how invisible deaf people are in greater society.
Visible.
Yeah, I think a good way to like think about it is like we would often notice people looking at us when we're signing. Always, just people are. Chynna said she was nosy. Hearing people are nosy. Okay, when it and
Yeah.
like I remember a story one time where so we would always ride the bus growing up, city bus, that was our jam. So we would ride the bus to get to downtown Seattle to get to our deafblind community class meeting thing, right? And so one day we're on the bus and we're always in the front section because again our mom can't see, can't hear, we get that front seat section. So Chynna and my mom are sitting here, I'm sitting here alone, right? It's kind of a crowded bus, we're saying, and Chynna and my mom are signing and they're doing the tactile and I'm signing to Chynna to interpret what I'm signing to mom. Oh, tell mom so and so. And this woman, she's over there, she's looking, she's staring, but I don't care. I ignore her. It's just we're used to it. We don't really pay attention at that point anymore when people would stare. And so she says to me, "Hey, don't make fun of her." You know, I'm like, I said,
Wow.
"That's my mom. This is my mom. I'm signing." You know, and so it just goes to just like first of all, she doesn't know what sign looks like. She couldn't tell the difference at all. She couldn't even see that Chynna and I were doing the same, communicating the same language, that we're using the same language. And all she saw is me as a kid making fun of, like in a sense, like bless her heart, because she thought I was being a brat and being a jerk, but I wasn't. I was just communicating across. And that's that's the thing is like, we kind of know like, all right, we're not part of that. We have this knowledge, but like, we understand that we're the bridge, that we are interlinked to this world as well because of our ability or, the fact that we can hear. So
you are totally the bridge. Do you know, I'm another piece of my ignorance is I don't know how common or uncommon it is for deaf adults to have hearing children. Is that depends on what caused the deafness?
I think it's very, I don't know I can't hate you with statistics or numbers, but it's like all my CODA friends I have here, we're all hearing, and their siblings are all hearing, and then their parents are deaf. It's like for our mom, she's the only deaf and deafblind, obviously, person in her family. For my dad, he's the only deaf person in his family. Like, it's really rare to me, like, when I know that, like, oh, like, one of my, like, my two best friends are twins, they're CODAs, and, like, their dad, I believe, comes from a deaf family. So it's really cool when, like, it's, like, a genetic, like, their family members are also deaf, like, not just their dad. But, oh, like, my uncle's deaf, my grandpa's deaf. I'm like, wow, that's so cool. Because most of the time it's just, like, you're one parent, and then your two parents they're the only deaf people in their family. And then typically, like, when they have kids, they're hearing, I think it might skip a generation. I know that, like, it's if my partner has the same gene that I have, which is like, I don't know what it's called, but like the deafblind gene, like Usher syndrome, then that means our child could be deaf and blind. So it's just like a gene you carry. But I don't know if I'm saying the right things. But
no, you're good, Chynna. No, you are saying the right things. Whatever you got to say is the right things. Okay.
Cool. I second the notion.
Yeah, but yeah. So it's either you have like one like. And like to be deaf, right? It could be you born with it. You can acquire deafness through a mechanical or sickness or something like that, right? There's all sorts of ways you could become deaf, right? And there's also different degrees of deafness, right? At a certain point, it's kind of like, when are you deaf, right? I kind of think it's like you go from your hearing, then you're hard of hearing, and then you're deaf, kind of, right? And I think typically when you have full profound hearing loss in at least one ear, you're deaf, right? Even if you have some hearing, you're still deaf. And there's cultural deafness and mechanical deafness. It's a whole thing. So either typically you have one deaf person, their whole family of hearing people, and that's a whole thing. Or you have families of deaf people because of a genetic component. Like historically, Martha's Vineyard had 1800s or 1700s, had a 4% deaf population because of, some inbreeding, but there's a 4% deaf population there because of a gene that was passed around quite a bit. And that's why we get Martha's Vineyard Sign Language, which is one of the pidgin languages that got formed in new ASL over time. But that's an example of like, there was a huge population, a significant population of deaf people at that time in that area where most people knew sign language, or at least MSSL and VSL. So yeah, it's kind of like
Interesting.
It's usually one person or the whole family typically, but I think it's more common for just be one person in the family.
Thank you. I just wonder if I share the experience of watching my father lose his hearing. I just want to see what your response is, by comparison or contrast, that as he heard less and less and less, we could just see that his isolation more and more and more. And there was a while where he didn't want us to know that he couldn't hear, and he would pretend because he got so embarrassed and tired to say, "I didn't hear you. What? Say it louder. I can't hear you." And it took a while for some of us to notice that he wasn't actually hearing for a while before we even figured it out. And in that time, he of course got quieter and less conversant because he didn't want, he was trying to protect us from knowing that anyway, I just saw the isolation increase. So I just wanted to see if you can, I just want to give you, we have about 12 more minutes, and I just want to say before I ask my last couple of questions, I wanted to give you a chance to say what else you want the hearing world who can hear this to know about the isolation, and anything you want to encourage, like as a CODA, like anything you can tell us to, like, hey, you know what you could do? Any suggestions to help decrease isolation or connect with people from the hearing community, or anything that comes to your mind?
I think when you're explaining about your father and just that feeling of isolation, I think hearing people, when losing your hearing is very scary, right? They're like, oh my God, that's horrible. But that's the beautiful thing about sign language. Yeah, oh, how am I going to survive? I can't hear. But I get callers at work who are learning signs so latent in life, but then there's a sense of community, and it is a culture, and there's connection. Okay, you can't hear, but you can still communicate with people. And there's the deaf community, even though it's small, it's also huge. And there's you can find just so many different people who are deaf or who are learning sign language. And, a lot of hearing people have to rely on, if they're losing their hearing late in life or just as they get older, rely on lip reading or maybe hearing aids, stuff like that. But my answer, it's hard to learn language. Trust me, I understand. But to just learn sign language opens so many doors, for somebody who is losing their hearing. And also you can take ASL classes, you can watch YouTube videos. I know even for most deaf people, when they go to a restaurant and the server even knows oh, hello, my name, and just finger spelling their name, or even knowing the alphabet goes such a long way. Cause then there's a sense of connection and being okay, this person knows my language. And I don't know, that's just my answer to that question.
No, that was beautiful.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah. 100%. There's a fear that oh, you lose hearing, but you just gain deafness. And you get it's not to say being deaf is a whole perfect thing. Yeah. Obviously if you're in a world full of that's geared towards hearing, and there's certain things it might be nice to hear the voice of your loved one, right? That's a very, right. But at the same time, it's okay, we're talking how you get to survive, right? How you get to live. Like Chynna said, community. There's so many people who are deaf. There's many people who've gone deaf late in life, right? And through learning ASL, you can find that community, and understand too that it's not all over. It's just you're gonna have to shift your perspective, and you're joining a club, pretty much, so to speak.
Wow.
I think both Tron and I would say, like, if we ever woke up one day and we were deaf, I don't think we would. I would more music. I
Me
love
too.
Nyla. Hi, Nyla.
Love you, Nyla. She's my best friend.
Hi, Nyla.
But sorry, lost
Music.
track. I would more music. I love music, but there's people who are, you know, like our mom would go to Grateful Dead concerts. Jerry Garcia was still alive, and she'd bring a balloon. She's always been deaf, fully deaf, but bring a balloon, and she could feel the vibrations through.
Wow.
You know, so there's ways to go about it, and I think it would probably change my perspective on music itself,
Right.
rather than being like, I can't ever listen to music again. Okay, I can't, you know, listen to music the way I've always listened to music, but it would change how I'd approach it. I'd probably get into metal, more in metal.
Oh my gosh, that is so inspiring. And we will go back to more inspiring thoughts, but I wanted to give you a chance because Kenneth had told me in a texting conversation today about tragic incidents of two deaf individuals, and I wanted to know if you just want the public to know and say their names and let people know that this kind of thing can happen.
Yes, I'm terrible.
So confused.
It's okay. I don't think I've
Tyron McAlpin and John T.
Yeah,
Williams.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm terrible with names. So John T. Williams is a Native American. Trying, you know the story. John T. Williams is a Native American man, and this is in Seattle. Was it 07, 08? Who was shot by a police officer. He's a wood carver. You remember? And he was walking down. I think he was like on his property or something. And he's a deaf man. And he was walking on his property. He's wood carving, his wood carving knife on him. And a police officer was like, "Hey, stop, freeze!" You know, with his gun. And I don't remember if he's walking. I don't think he's walking even towards the officer. He was just walking away, and he shot him because he felt threatened because he had a weapon. And then what was his name? Tyron? What was his name? The other guy. This is more recent.
Yeah. Tyron McAlpin.
So this guy, he's as cops do, they mistaken this guy as a suspect in a robbery or something like that. This is very recent. I think the details elude me, but he was like, you know, he's on the FaceTime with his wife, and he was signing, and the cops are like, hey, stop, and he's deaf, and so they tackle him and they beat him up because he's not complying. He's like, I'm deaf. I can't hear you. I'm laughing. And it's like, why are you laughing? Because Mr. Williams, he passed away. He was shot and killed. Tyrone, he's alive. And I think he's suing right now because he went to jail, as he should, because he went to jail. And, you know, they're like, and then the police edited the report and made it so he was threatening them. But they had, unfortunately for the police, unfortunately for, you know, everyone else, his wife was a witness and was like, hey, he's deaf. And I was telling him on the FaceTime, he's deaf. And he's like, oh, he's a suspect. He definitely did this. And it just goes to show, like, even police officers, they don't know anything. And this is where it kind of gets to the whole point where it's like why it's important, why we need people to know sign language and understand at least enough to say, please, can you stop if you're a cop, right? No,
or just like stop. Tap them, you know,
right.
Like, because I saw the video. My dad, he sends me really depressing articles about deaf people and just like the horrible brutality, and it makes me sad. I'm like, Dad, please don't send me this stuff. But there's like a reason that he sends it, and obviously like it's for a purpose. But when you started talking about it, I pulled it up on my phone. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember watching this video, being really sad, and just seeing these policemen like attack this deaf guy, just yelling at him. Like, and like the one thing is like when you learn like deaf culture, like, okay, if a deaf person's not looking at you or their back is to you, okay, what do? You flash a light, or you like stomp on the ground, like different things to get their attention. And it just shows
flashing a light.
Exactly.
That's the perfect one. Just flash your light.
And like literally. The lack of training in all areas that police officers have. And it's just like, it breaks my heart. Like my dad sends me the articles and I'm like, that makes me so sad that deaf people have to go through this just because police officers are ignorant that deaf people even exist. And like, that was one thing I wanted to say earlier is like, I know so many people who've never met a deaf person. Like a lot of people have never met a deaf person, let alone a deaf blind person. Like sometimes I sit to myself and I think, oh, my mom is the only deaf blind person that like my friend has met or this person has met. Like some people are so like oblivious to the fact that deaf people exist, which go to show the police officers in these situations and how they're treating deaf people. They just don't even know.
Yeah, and imagine other
Yeah.
situation like a fire, a burning building, a firefighter. Is anyone in here? Is anyone in here? You know, it's like, and that's a tricky one, right? It's like, okay, flash your light or something. Like you just don't assume. You assume, oh, someone's gonna hear me, right?
Yes. Yeah, we
And
do
that's
assume.
yeah, and so that, and then the other thing too is like, there's not like a ton of deaf people. It's not like half the people alive are deaf. It's not like a quarter of the people alive are deaf. So it's understandable. I don't want to demonize people who are hearing for not thinking about, because it's like, can you blame them? We're not really told much in media or growing up about deaf people. We're not, it's one of the, so it's not just like any random Joe Schmo's fault. Oh, you don't know about deaf people. Me pointing. You don't know about deaf people. It's okay. It's understandable.
Another
It's inevitable.
level of yeah, and another level of awareness to. I just have to let you guys know. I want you each to be able to. Want you each to be able to say something that you love to do, what you're passionate about, because you're both so creative and do so many things. And then your closing thought. But I'm just so grateful for everything that you've shared today. And I want to mention Kenneth was our ASL interpreter for 9 shows. We have one more show, and I think we've done 10 shows. But anyway, I want an interpreter every single week, and I feel remiss when I do not have one. And we're working on trying to get a budget for that, because interpreters deserve to be paid for sure. But anyway, Kyra, do you want to start? Sorry, Chynna. Please let us know what you love and what you want the world to know about you or about either one of your worlds.
I don't know. What do I love to do? I love my job. I love interpreting. It's my lifeline. I also love just like being at home with my boyfriend and my cat and my dog and our fish, and like just watching movies and just being comfortable. I love hanging out with my friends. Just like I love the life I have at work with the deaf community, and I also just like my own little world at home, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, total sense.
Yeah, I don't. Closing thoughts. Yeah. This was great. I loved it. I was so nervous. I think if you want to learn sign language, go on YouTube. Bill V, I guess I think he's like a really well-known, he teaches sign language. If you Google any word, all the time, how do you sign this? His picture will come up, or his video will come up. There's ways to learn sign language. If you see a deaf person, just say, hi, nice to meet you. I don't know, just something like that. Great. Like deaf people aren't scary. I don't know. That's all I can think of. Kenny will probably say better words.
Thanks for busting stereotypes.
If you see 2 deaf people having a conversation, don't interrupt their conversation. just give a hello. If you're passing by, just give a hello. Be respectful, right? But Chynna, we get a pass because we are so awesome. Okay,
yeah,
I'm just kidding. But I guess for me, I love to draw. I love drawing. I love video games. I love my girlfriend. Shout out Helen. I love you, Helen. And Dixon.
Love you, Helen.
Shout out to Helen. She just passed the bar. One of the youngest people in America to pass the bar. Okay.
Congratulations.
So, I love also being at home and quiet, just like peace and quiet. Drawing. And for those listening, if you're in Davis, join the Davis ASL Club every other Tuesday at the Mary L. Stevens Library in the small conference room, ASL_Davis on Instagram. I always be posting the information on there. It's free. Just come. You learn ASL. We got people at different levels there. It's a great time. I turn my voice off and I just start signing. And I just start signing. People go, what? What are you saying? And I just go, okay. You just go from there. Bill V, Dr. Bill on YouTube, on the internet. He's a great starting point. He's got a great ASL intro series. Watch his videos.
Spell his name?
BILLVICARS.
Okay.
Vicars. Wow. I can't say his last name, so I always just say Bill V.
Okay, I'll put it in the show notes. Gosh, you guys, thank you so much for opening up a world to us and for being your authentic, beautiful selves. I so appreciate you. Please stay in touch. I also want to thank the listeners and viewers and our engineer Rebel and our producer Dean and your dear friend who kept sending notes and your families and for everything that you both do. Incredible human beings, really outstanding.
Thank you. It was a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Be sure to tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time at w4cy.com or Talk4TV. And may we all have enriching conversations in diversity this week. Thank you.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate